What I do is inconsequential. Why I do what I do is I get to shorten people's journeys every day. What I love about our hospitality industry is that it's our mission to make people feel cared for while on their journeys. Together, we'll explore what hospitality means in the built environment, in business, and in our daily lives. I'm Dan Ryan, and this is Defining Hospitality. Today's guest has been involved in real estate and hospitality for more than 30 years. He's been featured in many, many magazines, including Travel and Leisure. He's a modern day innkeeper at his core, which is so incredibly fantastic. He's the CEO and founder of Palisociety. Ladies and gentlemen, Avi Brosh. Welcome, Avi.
How are you? So nice to be here with you today.
It's wonderful to be here with you
on this
today.
Festive Christmas week-ish.
Yeah. Everything seems to be coming to a head right now, as far as everyone dotting all their I's and crossing all their T's before they can spend some time with their families.
Yeah.
I'm so excited to be speaking to you today for many, many different reasons. The first one is I always love having a personal connection with the guests who I'm interviewing. And with you in particular, we went to the same super duper small high school in New Jersey, where I don't know, I had 39 people in my class. How many did you have in yours?
I had 38.
Yeah. And the odds of that happening, and also then making the journey out to California, you stayed, I came back. I don't know.
Yeah.
I just feel like we have a lot in common on our journeys. So
yeah, you know, it's one of those things where because the school is so small, it's almost, you almost never really, especially living in Southern California, almost never run into people that have been there or even really heard of it, frankly. And I'm really proud of having gone to that particular school, because it's a very unique place, and have a lot of fond memories, I think, of my experience there, although I'm sure there were some challenging times as well, because it was high school, I suppose. But yeah, no, it's a very unique connection for sure. And during those really formative times in your life, you take away from it some unique things. And I think back on my experience there, more often than I would think, than you would think, but it's definitely something that has resonated with me over the years.
I heard a really interesting thing. I don't think it's a statistic. It's more of an anecdote, but it was at one of these learning events I was at, and they said that most human beings in the course of their learning, from grammar school all the way through university, have 5 incredibly memorable teachers. I was actually shocked by that, because from my experience at Saddle River Day School, I think I had 6 to 8, and that didn't even count all the great ones that I had in college. And I think that you and I and all the people that went to this super duper small school were served really well, because the teachers were so freaking incredible.
I agree. I think, I remember the teachers really mostly as being characters, almost like in a Wes Anderson movie, more than for their educational prowess. But that's because I wasn't very a studious person. I was more interested in these people's personalities. But yeah, when I went, it was still, I don't know when I went, it was still called Saddle River Country Day School. I don't know did they take it out by the time you got there?
They took it out.
I don't know. I don't like that they took that out. I think it adds a little personality. But yeah, I remember a handful of characters, really. And I was particularly taken with the PE / coach, Joe Aganello. I wonder what he's up to. But he was just one of those guys that had a way of connecting with students and lifting them up in a way that I thought was very unique. And so I really enjoyed my my time on the sports teams there. And in I think it was maybe my junior year, we won the state championship on our soccer team, which was pretty incredible, considering, the school is so small. And I, to no small part, really was to him. It was a little bit of a bad news bears type situation because he wasn't necessarily a soccer guru per se, but what he was, just a dedicated educator, I suppose. And we just had a really interesting group of people. And we would just take the little bus, to these. I remember because when you go to a prep school, it's not like you play the town next door and you're just driving 10 minutes to the next high school. We would have to drive to Princeton and, upstate New
Totally.
York and all kinds of weird places. And that took, and he drove the bus and, we would get out there and do our thing and come back. And so a lot of fond memories of that experience.
Yeah, and not to talk too much about him, but his son actually was an incredible soccer player. And then after I left, I think they won the state championship in soccer again. And he was still guiding them. So that's
amazing.
Pretty awesome. And his son was like a superstar.
I remember when I was there, his son, maybe he was small, maybe he was 3 or 4, whatever, something like that. The other thing about him, and maybe we shouldn't really talk about it, but I just thought was so interesting, and maybe you don't even know this, but he, on the weekends to make money, he used to go and tend bar at like a bar in like the Lower East Side or somewhere downtown. And I actually think I can't remember if this is true or not, but I actually think that maybe in my senior year, a couple of friends and us actually, I think, got in the class. Somehow we must have figured out where it was, and we actually went down to where this bar in New York just to see if it was actually true, and it was.
Wow.
And I haven't thought about that in, gosh, a really long time. But
anyway, that's hilarious. Well, yeah. So actually tying back, like I had learned a real love of literature at Saddle River Day School. I had some just incredible teachers. One of the books that we read was Howard's End by E.M. Forster. And one of the things that I loved about it, this idea of only connect. And if I look at like my path into hospitality and thinking about what I love so much about it, it just fosters so much of these connections as was written throughout there. Tell me, how did you find your way from New Jersey to California and then really trailblazing in this kind of new, really exciting hybrid model of hospitality? And just tell us about your journey and kind of where you are now.
I tell you in a bridge version because, it could take forever to tell you, but essentially, when I went to college, after I graduated Saddle River Country Day School, I was very fortunate enough to somehow, by the skin of my teeth, got accepted to Boston University in the days when you could be sort of a mediocre student and still get into Boston University. And so when I was in Boston, you get to meet so many more people in an environment like that, as opposed to a small private school in Bergen County, New Jersey. And I just so happened to meet people from all over the country. And I met a wonderful girl from Southern California. And at some point, I can't remember what year, I think it was my junior year also, she invited me to come out for Christmas break, to come out, and her dad lived in Malibu, on the beach in Malibu. And I really didn't know anything about California at that time. And so, I had nothing else to do. So I went out and spent a couple weeks in California. I just couldn't believe it, coming from New Jersey and just sort of living in Boston and really being, very East Coast centric, I suppose, in my thinking. New York City, Northern Jersey, and that was kind of my world, and I didn't really know a whole lot about any place else. And so when I got a sort of a look into what was happening in Southern California, and you probably had the similar experience, I sort of said to myself, well, if I'm going to graduate college and I'm going to make a go of it and struggle and like have to make ends meet and get a job and try and figure out how I'm going to, sort of make a go of it. It just seemed like doing it in Los Angeles seemed a lot more pleasant than doing it in Manhattan, which, in the mid 80s was, still a little bit rough. And And, it was one of those things, even in those days, if you made $100,000 a year, which at that time seemed completely unattainable to me, to do that and live in New York, you still were kind of struggling, like it was, incredibly expensive. And in LA, you could sort of, kind of for your money, I suppose, get a lot nicer place to live. And it was really nice weather, and it just seemed like a nicer spot. So that's how I made it to Southern California. I graduated school and migrated to California for exactly those reasons. That was the good news. The bad news is I really had no skills. I didn't really know anything about anything. And when you're 22 or 23 years old, you really don't know shit, right? So I just got into the real estate business really by accident. The actual story is I used to, when I first got out here, I didn't know anybody. And so I would go down to I lived in Westwood. So I would go down to there was some basketball courts behind the Veterans Building. And during the day, I'd go and play basketball. And I just happened to meet a guy there who I would kind of see, I don't remember, maybe a couple times a week. And we just started to have a chat. And he mentioned to me, he said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm looking for a job." He says, "Well, I got a friend who's a real estate developer who is looking for like a gopher, like an assistant type person." I was like, "Oh, great. I'd love to go meet this person." So I went and met this person. I didn't have a resume or anything, but I had a really nice suit, I think. And so I remember like it was yesterday, I went and visited with him, and he hired me on the spot. And I just got a job as like a gopher in the real estate world. And I sort of just used that as a springboard for really learning the real estate development business. And I'm going, major fast forward now to, I was sort of an ambitious young person. And by the time I was about 30, I was in a position to start my own company. Again, ignorance is bliss. And so, I sort of figured out a way to do that. And it's a very long story about what that is, but I was ultimately able to do it.
I want to just ask,
yeah.
I want to ask a question there on where you said we had a similar experience. I'm totally shocked that your first experience is really Malibu.
Yeah.
Because when I first moved out to go to school there, I became friends with this guy, Misha. His dad was really one of the first hotel design people ever. And he had a house in Malibu. And I just remember walking in and seeing this whole different lifestyle, welcoming people in off the beach and just being friends with everyone. And that was really, I think, my first real example of hospitality. His name's Michael Bednar. He's like a mentor and father figure of mine. And so it was just really shocking to hear that, because it's so different from where we grew up.
That's the thing, like I remember walking into the house in the house in Malibu, because, Malibu is kind of an odd place where on the street side of these houses, you're like, they don't really, they don't look like the houses in Saddle River, obviously, where there's lots of land and, they're sort of very majestic. And I remember, rolling up to this house and going, yeah, okay, and, you walk in and you're like, oh my God, just right on the beach. And it's like walking into a movie, and just sort of, experiencing that. And this, and, and Californians themselves live a very different lifestyle than, Northeasterners. It's more casual. It was more open-minded. The food was completely different, and the sort of the attitude, the speed, the tone, the priorities, and I didn't know any of that. And when you go, like even just going to the restaurants, just everything was so completely different. It was mesmerizing. And it's almost like one of those things where you go back and you don't want to tell anybody about it because you don't want anyone else to know about it, because it's so good.
For me, it was just really almost like landing on a moon.
Totally.
It was a completely foreign and different experience. Same country, but almost a different planet.
It really was.
When you go back to when you met the guy and he hired you as a gopher on the spot, what do you think he saw in you?
I was a person of not many skills, but I think that he understood pretty quickly that I was a guy who had sort of uh, some frame of reference for understanding what was perhaps good taste and what was perhaps, um, you know, uh, uh, I had an acumen about me that, was a byproduct of my upbringing and where I was from and how I was educated and the people I was surrounded myself with, which I think in a lot of ways, uh, was a privilege that I wasn't aware that I had. But, our collective background was such that, we were around successful people and we were in a setting that, um, had a certain personality behind it that just rubbed off on you. There's just no way to have it not. And I think that he just got a sense that I could probably not only, go get coffee, but I probably could also have a point of view about certain other areas TBD that I wasn't aware of.
I think a lot of that also probably has to do with just this, scrappy New Jersey, New York metro, just like get out there, get things done, right? Where you look
Yeah.
at kind of the stereotypical California is like super laid back and all
Mhm.
this. So it's almost as if you're part of that, but you're bringing something else to the table. And then I guess fast forward that first hire into how you wound up transitioning into hospitality.
Well, just to touch on a little bit about where you're alluding to is it was very clear to me pretty quickly that, and I would say this is not as true today because California has evolved a lot in the last 35 years, Southern California in particular, and Los Angeles, I suppose, if to be even more hyper local. But uh, it dawned on me pretty quickly that I was just used to operating at a different speed than everybody else was. And I think there was probably a 15-year run or maybe a 20-year run where I was like, if someone was walking a mile, I was walking 5 miles. And so I was just faster and quicker on my feet and had more of a sense of urgency. And I just came with like a different skill set in terms of time, a sense of time and the value of time. And so I was able to really sort of monetize that, I suppose. And I was able to very quickly kind of accomplish things that I couldn't in another environment like New York City, which had a lot of people like me in it and a lot of smarter, better, more, sort of people with more resources. And I just didn't really hold a candle to a lot of the people that I was sort of seeing around me. And here it was a little bit of the opposite. Like I was sort of able to understand that there was an opportunity. And because of that, I went fast. So that's really what allowed me to really get into a situation where I was able to start my own company at 30, 31. I was just ambitious that way. And I was able to kind of just, I don't want to say run circles around people, but I was just sort of like, by 9 a.m. where other people were just kind of rolling out, I was already, I'd already done, what other people had accomplished, would take them till 1 o'clock. And I was willing to just work a little harder and think about it more. And I didn't really need to get up in the morning and go surfing. Not that there's anything wrong with that. And I think it's a beautiful thing, but that just wasn't my DNA. And
Totally.
so when I when I started my own company, it was really a development company. It was, it didn't even dawn on me to do anything that related to hospitality or lodging. I was just a hospitality and lodging fan. I loved hotels and restaurants like a lot of people did, but I didn't know anything about it. And so it didn't seem to be the real estate business for me. It seemed to be some other magical, mystical thing that I just had no idea about. But to answer your question, by the time, I had done it, I'd sort of had my own company for, maybe 7, 8, 10 years. By then I had had a lot of success. in developing real estate, and I created a lot of relationships and both political goodwill and goodwill amongst capital sources and what have you. And I also got a lot of confidence, and I just sort of had a sort of an interesting opportunity come my way, which didn't make sense for my typical development scheme, but it made sense if you were to do transient occupancy or a hotel. There was a way to develop the property in a way that was more dynamic than if you wanted to do traditional mixed use. And when the project was originally presented to me, I just sort of dismissed it out of hand because it just wasn't something that I was focused on. But I don't know what happened. I think I just sort of dawned on me that, maybe I could actually do a hotel that perhaps was a little bit different than what I had seen in particular in Los Angeles at that time. And really what that was my premise was that I thought that there would be an opportunity to do a hotel that was more of a pied-à-terre. It was more of a residential style hotel, because that really didn't exist in Los Angeles. And I knew there was a market for it, because I knew that there was a lot of fashion, entertainment, multimedia, film, television, people that were in LA for extended periods of time, and they were either staying at shitty furnished apartments, or they were staying in traditional hotels, but just for a really long period of time. And so I just had deep local knowledge with respect to that. So my premise was, well, why don't I just create a place that had these pied-à-terres, that was more of a lodging style property, and create a little cafe and a bar, and create this environment that was appropriate for those people. And so I just sort of took the leap of faith and cashed in on a lot of my, political connections, my social connections, my capital connections, and scrapped it together and built my first hotel, and opened in late 2007, early 2008. And, it was such a quirky project and such a quirky product that I couldn't find anybody who was interested in running it. Because nobody really understood what it was. So I didn't know anybody. I didn't know any operators, or really didn't know any food and beverage operators or hotel operators. And I tried to meet as many people as I could. I remember I would leave all of these meetings going, these people, I don't think I can trust them with this enterprise. And so I just sort of decided to do it myself, and, trial by fire. But despite all of the mistakes that I made, the property itself was very successful, because my premise was ultimately correct, and the market really did receive it quite well. And that was essentially the springboard into hospitality.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that I find so intriguing about what you've done with Palisociety and Pali House as well, is that you are unique amongst your competitive set, in the sense that I'm sure there are others that do this, where you control the entire vertical, right? So from design to purchase to management, like you're a complete one-stop, fully integrated shop. And I'm wondering, you mentioned before that you were a fan of hospitality. What were those parts, those quirky parts you mentioned of being a fan of hospitality, that helped you get to this place where you wanted to bring it all into one vertical?
Yeah, I think it's sort of parallel paths. But what I would say is that the hotels that I really loved were the ones that were able to tell a story about their place. And, whether you would sort of, from their placemaking, it was less about, I suppose, design sensibility. It was more about a story that they were telling about the kind of experience that they intended for you to have in the hotel. And so I was a huge fan of people that did that incredibly well. And sometimes, people got it right very on an intention basis, and sometimes they got it right sort of accidentally.
Who were your biggest like, if you were to say you were the strongest fanboy towards specific projects or properties, what would they have been like?
Gosh, I would, I was a huge, at the very early on, the Ian Schrager, Philippe Stark collaborations. I think at the beginning, I just never seen
Totally.
anything like that.
Yeah.
And so, it's funny, like when I think back on those, it was just a complete paradigm shift. And so if you were somebody who was interested in design or placemaking or tone, and you were sensitive to it, lighting levels, music levels, food, fashion, design, it was just a game changer. And so I really love that. And I think even before that, I remember I went to
And just to be clear, would that be more like Mondrian on Sunset kind of
no,
deal?
this was more New York. I would say this was more my
Royalton.
first experience with Philippe Stark was Cafe Coste in Paris, where I'd never seen a urinal wall before, where you literally peed on the wall, which I thought was like, when you're an impressionable young person. And that particular cafe was actually beautiful and had a lot of things about it that I'd never seen. And of course, with Morgan's, which was really my first experience or first entree into that, it was just a game changer. And I think today, there's been so much of a huge evolution in placemaking since then. But that was a huge, Morgan's, Paramount,
Royalton was in that realm.
Royalton. So those were all just, really inspirational. I think that it wasn't like necessarily my aesthetic per se, but it was just, the tone aspects of what is. And, I'm just old enough to have been there and appreciate it as a young person. A lot of people, I would say my contemporaries, I've never even been to those properties. So
I think also when you said something, you referred to it as placemaking, really, which just really struck a chord with me, because if I think about and see what you're doing and how you've brought it all inside, and kind of what Stark was also doing then, it's really this sense of place. Is this all inclusive, like you say, it's all the things that touch it. It's the fashion, the art, the music, the film, the entertainment, but also this really incredibly strong sense of place. And then if you think about placemaking and that inspiration for you and kind of what you're doing right now with Pally, how does that help you define your thesis and what hospitality is at each of the projects that you're working on, the existing and the new ones?
Well, I want to answer that question, but I want to kind of go back a little bit too, because I want to also sort of, the other thing, since I was young and had the ability to, experience lots of places, there were also some other people doing things that in my mind were just, incredible, and that were in a lot of ways even more informative to what I started to think about, which gave me confidence. So there, back when I was in, late high school, early college, there was a place called Area that opened on Hudson down in Tribeca, which was like also a completely different than, the Schrager Philippe Stark collaboration, because it's much more downtown in terms of its sensibility. But that was so impressionistic on my mind, in terms of their ability to create a different kind of tone, which was much more, I would say, downtown, And then, followed up by that is, all the Keith McNally restaurants early on, Odeon, and, obviously Schiller's and Pastis and all these other, and oh my God, I'm blanking on the Lucky
Strike.
and then the other one on the Pravda, the Russian restaurant. So these places were, incredibly impressionistic. And I think what they were doing was kind of creating an environment manufacturing an environment that didn't feel manufactured, right? So you really felt like you were in Paris or wherever else. And so that was really incredible. And then, these guys are, were very impressionistic, made huge impressions on me.
But you know what's really just to go on the pastis side, and I love that you said that, because it shut down, And then they just reopened it, I
Mhm.
don't know, just before the pandemic. And I swear you walk in there, and I know that you say it's not manufactured because you do feel like you're in Paris when you're there,
Mhm.
but they were able in some crazy way to make that new location feel exactly like it. It smelled the same.
Yeah.
The lighting was exactly the same. They even, one of the dad or the doorman from the old
Mhm.
one was a dad at my kid's school,
Mm.
and they brought him back and he was the doorman again.
Mhm. Yeah.
And it was just like the attention to that level of detail is freaking incredible and
Well,
inspiring.
that should not have worked, to close it down and reopen. It shouldn't have worked.
It
And
shouldn't have. I agree.
I was very skeptical, but in a lot of ways, I think it's better than the last one. But so to tie it back to me, my idea was, how do you create this all-encompassing sort of experience and try and target it into lodging. And it's not, I'm not the first person to do that, by any means. There's a lot of unbelievable hoteliers and storytellers out there that I think do an incredible job. I was not the only one. I was early in doing it in Los Angeles, right? There wasn't anything like that really in LA. And my first hotel, Pally House West Hollywood, in a lot of ways, kind of brought that sensibility in my own sort of novice freshman try at a hotel. But I was able to bring some of that to the table, and I got rewarded for it because people gravitated towards that. Obviously, when you do a hotel, the numbers, as opposed to a restaurant, let's just say, the numbers are bigger, the risks are bigger, the moving parts are more. And I just thought that I could insert after the first hotel, I thought, I could just sort of insert myself in a big way in terms of the personality. I just thought I would do it myself, and I would just sort of take on everything myself, because that's what that's what that's what my sort of my the people that I admired the most, that's what they did. Obviously they had help, but it was singular vision. And I just sort of thought that was the road that I wanted to go down. I knew that probably was expensive, meaning I probably would be less prolific early, but as opposed to trying to bring on a established brand and attach them to a project and sort of walk away and let them do their thing. I knew that, but it was just more authentic to the way that I wanted to do it, which I think is a fairly consistent theme in terms of my professional career, which is, to probably take a slightly road less travel and try and be as connected to the work as I could be, and try and, have an outlet for my ego, which is, I have a big ego. And so it was a way for me to have an outlet to express myself in that way, from not only a creative way, but also from a business perspective.
And you mentioned like a singular vision. I think that's what you said. But to me, as far as what I'm getting from you, is really an uncompromising vision, right? You're so clear. And if you think about, I'm sure who many of your heroes are, it's that uncompromising vision that at all costs, they are going to get from point A to point B, and people will fall by the wayside along the way, but you get there. Like, where do you think that came from?
I just, some people are born with a chip on their shoulder and have a little bit of a punk rock kind of attitude about life and about, zigging when you should zag. And I'm just that kind of a personality. I think it's mellowed, as I've gotten older, but, or especially early in my career, I was just, a contrarian top to bottom. And so I reveled in that. It gave me energy. It gave me, it was just part of who I was as a person. I was not sort of indignant or in any way, disrespectful, but for my own personal life, I just wanted to be more along the lines of my, these people that really inspired me, which was to do something that wasn't existing already. That's what got me charged up. And even though a lot of people have, criticized some people for just recreating to a fault, a cafe or or whatever it might be, an environment. I, I sort of disagree with that. It's not an easy thing to do, to create something that makes you feel a certain way.
I
And
completely agree.
so I just really feel I have so much respect for, these, and there's many, now there's, a lot of people I think do an incredible job, and I'm a fan, frankly. But I think for me, early days in Los Angeles, I just had a little bit of a head start with respect to that. And so I was able to, even though I opened my first hotel not at the most opportune time, I was able to bring my, my real estate savvy and my capital market savvy and my just, my life experience savvy to navigate through the global financial crisis in a way where I was able to get out through the other side and build the platform that I have today.
And when we think of your uncompromising vision of what you're delivering to the universe and what you're delivering to the marketplace, and how does that tie, like if you were to describe hospitality from your uncompromising perspective, how do you define it?
It's a great question, because hospitality, I think, means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And when I first started, I didn't really know how to really do hospitality. I think you kind of learn as you go. One of the things about hospitality is, I think, when you got inside a physical space, the kind of hospitality you provide has to be on point with that physical space and what the customer expectation level is. And so, I'm very particular at our hotels, and restaurants and what have you, that it's a certain kind of hospitality, which is not the same hospitality you would get at a Four Seasons in Paris. It's different and than the Motel 6 in off a highway in Cincinnati. It's just you have to decide what it is that you want to deliver in terms of the style of hospitality you want to deliver, which you don't, that's not something you figure out in a year or two or three. It's taken a while to kind of pinpoint what that is. And so, my role as a CEO now, with a lot of properties across the country, is to be able to communicate, through our team, what that level of hospitality is and should be for our properties. And as a CEO, to be able to create the space for that hospitality to be delivered, and for the teams on the property level to deliver that level of hospitality. And I think that it has to be, for me, something that's repeatable, and it has to be consistent. Sometimes you might get a manager at a property that is particularly strong in a certain area or has a particular personality, and people respond positively or negatively to it. And those things you can't control down to that, but I think you can give people the tools to create hospitality. My experience is that at the property level, people like for you to know their name, and they like for you to remember, what they like to drink. And I think people generally like good housekeeping and a really good cup of coffee, and just a friendly environment. I don't think that you need to be over the top on any level. I think if you want over the top, you go to a different place, not our place. And so I think that what we've gotten really good at, in particular over the last, I would say 5 years, is really honing in on what the expectation level is for our on-property teams, but also communicating very early in the guest experience what the expectation level should be. So the expectation and reality meet. A lot of, that's what happens when people are, disenfranchised to your hospitality is that they are expecting one thing and they get something different. And I think that that's when people, get annoyed. The other thing I think,
Yeah.
one other thing I think is really important for people to hear is that you don't always get it right, and I think that, I don't care if you stay at the Aman in Tokyo, where they're meticulous about their hospitality and a certain brand of it. They have off days, or the customer or something happens, you just know. And I think part of hospitality is guest recovery. And a lot of times, people remember you more for your guest recovery than they actually do than something that goes off, let's just say, flawlessly. And so I think, that's not something you learn. No one tells you that at the beginning, right? No, certainly nobody told me that. So I just, you learn as you go. And so I think, we've just honed in, it's like putting in your time and understanding your properties and creating the expectation and connecting that to the reality of the experience and try and get it right more times than not.
And as you're on this path of growth, I've heard like this, some tension between, okay, so you have your CEO hat on, you have this track record, you have all of your success behind you and great teams everywhere. There's this idea of guest management, delivering hospitality, guest recovery, and you want to scale that. It's making systems and processes. But one of the things that early on in our conversations is you're wearing that hat, but also if you were to put on your modern day innkeeper hat, like how do you, okay, I understand as you're scaling, you want to have these things and you want to manage your teams everywhere, but you're also, you have your own way of doing it as the modern day innkeeper, which I just love that. How do you reconcile and balance that?
It's a good question. It's a lot easier than you would think. And the reason it's easier than you think is that, our hotels are small in size by design. And because of that, we get to really know our guests. We get a lot of repeat customers. And we're able to wrap our arms around the experience for the most part for people. And so that's a huge plus. It's not like we have a 1,000-room convention center hotel where there's no way that you can really keep tabs of anything. And, that's just a different business. So we have a much more of an innkeeper mentality. That's number one. The size is just such that we're able to, I think, be more personalized. One. Two is it cannot be overstated how important systems, protocols, and procedures are, and being able to create a scenario where it's really not that challenging for our on-site teams to execute those. Try and take away from them a lot of things that are not about the quality of guest experience, like whatever, counting bottles or, whatever, dealing with food costs or, some of these ministerial things that really are more P&L focused, and really stripping that away from the people that are guest facing. And so they're able to just be friendly. And I think that we're looking for people to be friendly and trusty. And I think you can instill that in the property teams without actually being there. That being said, when the managers are there, they need to lead by example, which, if there's a paper on the floor, I remember when I first started, there was a guy, there was a gentleman that worked for me and I remember I would go to the properties, I'd bend down and pick up paper, and he was just mortified, because that, in the hotel world, the, owners or, senior people, would just point to it. And at the beginning, I was so self-conscious. I was like, oh, what am I, I really feel the urge to pick up that paper or to, whatever, bus a table. And for a while I didn't do it because I thought that maybe that wasn't becoming, but after a while I just couldn't help myself, so now when I go to hotels, I don't care. I'll talk to people, I'll bus a table, I will, look at dust levels in different areas. I mean, I'm sort of like a classic, a little bit of a classic proprietor. And so I'm just teaching people to be their own proprietors, whether they're, front desk agents or area general managers or president of the company, if you don't have a proprietor sort of sensibility, it's difficult to do. But people, if you have pride in these spaces, and I just lead by example. I go to all the properties on a regular basis, and I just go in there. They don't love it when I'm there because I'm a little bit of a tyrant, but it's what's important. I think the physical maintenance of these assets and a friendly environment are, if you can't do that, you really shouldn't be in the business.
Well, I also think, like, when you say tyrant, you also think about, like,
I'm
that
aware that I'm
the uncompromising vision, right? So
yeah.
you're there, but if I think about, okay, so now you can do all the best you can to control the guest experience, right? How you're delivering hospitality, how you're making them feel. Something that really jumped out of what you were saying to me was this idea of guest recovery, because oftentimes they might not remember all those intentional things you're doing, but where you can really win someone over is through guest recovery. So I'd love to hear a story about that. And then if you think about it as you're scaling and growing, and you think about the systems and processes, how do you give your teams the bandwidth or the leeway to have a successful guest recovery when that happens?
It's so funny that you asked me that, because I literally this morning, we have the guests and the community have an easy way to get in touch with us about whatever their issues are. And you can't please everybody all the time, so let's just be clear about that. But this morning got, there was an email that came in from a neighbor at a hotel, and the kitchen was playing music loud at 6 a.m. And they called over to the hotel nicely and asked them to turn it down. And let's just put it this way, it didn't happen quickly enough or with the right amount of respect. So what you have to do in those circumstances, and to say, I used to get annoyed beyond belief, right? And you just get very upset and take it very personally. But what you need to do is take those things as a real opportunity to let the on-property teams, really be hospitable. So we encourage the team to reach out to the neighbor, and obviously, beyond the regular apology, but then we shower them with hospitality. We invite them in for drinks or dinner. We invite them in to come stay or whatever it is. It's really an opportunity to go above and beyond to create this sense of an experience where it goes from an extreme negative into an extreme positive. And that's just something you foster at the corporate level, and you demand it, and you just lead by example, and you try not to get upset over a lot of things that really are more common sense based, and you sort of give the entire team top to bottom the ability to overcompensate. And in my mind, that's the right approach.
And then, we hear these stories of, I believe it was Ritz-Carlton, that they would give everyone in the employee at a hotel, hey, if there's a guest situation and there's a recovery, you guys have $500 at your disposal to make anything go away without even thinking. Mm-hmm. And then that seems to be a relatively easy thing to kind of roll out and communicate to everyone. Do you have any secrets or
no?
Not, or like tactics?
Yeah, my secret would be, having been on the receiving end of, some of that and whatever, it only works if it feels sincere. If you have some manager at some Ritz at some random place that is annoyed because he's got to spend $500 and he's just trying to whatever to make you go away, that's worse. That makes the problem worse. It doesn't make the problem better. So my secret is really about, not just comping something that just doesn't get the job done. There has to be something memorable about the experience, has to be done, in good spirit and with the right intent. And it's not going to happen all the time, but you want to try and create that experience more times than not. So I'm not a huge fan of like blanket, budgets. I don't think that that matters because if someone checks into the, but let's just say someone checks into the hotel, isn't feeling well, and you send them chamomile tea and cookies that cost you $3, that's so much more valuable than anything else that you could ever do. And in that and that's real hospitality. That's innkeeping. And so,
Especially if they prefer chamomile versus
well,
Earl Grey, right?
if you can get there, then that's probably someone who's staying in actually your guest house. But I think but I think we want to try and infuse that as much as we can into the overall process. It's not easy to do all the time, but I think if you at least start with that intent, you're going to get it right more times than not.
I totally agree. And that's where I was trying to get into that balance between CEO and like having systems and processes and everything running, but then also balancing that with innkeeper where, at the very beginning, it's like, I want them to say their name, but some hotels have a policy where it's when a guest checks in, say their name 3 times. It's very prescriptive, right? And it's almost like a robot. It's just like that general manager you were referring to.
Yeah.
Oh, here, I'll comp you whatever.
Yeah.
It's not there. It's how do you find out they like Earl Grey or chamomile and make up for it in that really open-hearted way. It's almost as if you have to be so incredibly empathetic to each and every guest that walks through and just know what they want and what turns them on.
Yeah, I don't think that, the answer is, I'd love to say yes, but that's actually not what it is. It's like, to use a sports metaphor, I think that it's better to play zone defense than man to man. And the reason is that if you as a team are, sort of collectively know what position to take depending on what happens, not every single guest needs that same level of hand-holding that others do. So it's really better to take a sort of this collective team approach to some of this stuff. And then that really just is tone, and we're not big on scripts, and we're not, we don't have name tags. We do have uniforms, but the uniform is part of the placemaking, frankly. And I think that's what I think that's what some of the best hotels and restaurants do well is they just kind of leave you to have a good experience, but if you needed a little extra hand holding or something, that it's available for you.
So you did your first hotel in the midst of the global financial crisis.
Yeah.
Or just after it was all happening right around
right in the middle of it.
Yeah, not a great time. So you've survived, you're growing, we're hit with this pandemic, and you're still growing and getting it right and delivering your service to everyone and getting to know your customers and delighting people. What's exciting you most about the future as you come through this?
I think that when you're first starting in business, or especially in any business, and in particular in hotels, I think that if you're a prolific person like myself, my frustration level would really lie within not being able to do enough. I wanted to do more, and being able to do more, and perhaps not having the track record to do it, or the awareness, having the patience to just get up and do the best, get up every day and just kind of doing the best you can and just try and, push things forward. So I would say on one level now where we sit today is, we have quite a robust pipeline. And so I'm really excited. I love being busy, and I love working on all of those things. And I love, making all those spaces, and I can do them incredibly prolifically. And I love that. So I'm very excited about that. The other thing that I'm really excited about is there's really 3 other things. One is I'm excited about having the opportunity to take our portfolio of brands and maybe doing them outside of the US. I just think that there's room for a cool in just about every market in the world. And so, I eventually want to be able to transition into doing stuff more internationally. I just think that is another, box to check as a brand and just for my own personal growth.
Any
And
particular
then,
continent first?
I think we're relevant, I think, in Canada and Mexico first, I think, because it's, easy for us to get to. And I think that it's not a stretch. And I think that, makes to me the most immediate sense. But that being said, I'm sort of agnostic in terms of what that is. We've had conversations with people in lots of different places. And, it has to be obviously the right fit. So that's one. Number two is, I'm really interested in exploring now for the brand other collaborations, partnerships, strategic alliances in a way where it sort of transcends a little bit of just the one-off hotel business. And so we're having some interesting discussions in a variety of different places about what that means. And so that's kind of exciting. And I want to try and engage my own curiosity about what that is and continue to grow the brand that way.
I want to pull on that one a little bit. Like if I were to give you a magic wand right now and anything was possible on that idea of collaborations and alliances, like what's the perfect outcome? You're not encumbered in any way, shape, or form. You can just do it tomorrow.
I feel like I'd be giving too much away by telling you, only because we're sort of a little bit down the road on a couple of new thoughts and ideas, which in my mind are the perfect thing that I want to do. And so I'm going to keep that a little close to the vest because we've got a couple things that we're working on that I think are really interesting and dynamic. Really three things, and that I think to me represent what I think the perfect things are. But I think it's a little early to say. But what I would say is these three things that we're working on are, just new ideas about growing the brand, in a sort of and slightly different verticals. And so I'm excited about what that potential is there, and we need a little bit more time to bake those a little bit more. And then
what's the
and
third?
then and then on in terms of the third, my son, who's 25, works in the business with us, and my wife works in the business with me and us. She has a very, very important role and has been such an important aspect to helping us get to where we are today. She heads up, today, technically, she sort of heads up all of the brands, the branding, how we interact and interface with the general public. But and she's done an absolutely heroic job there. But the reality is, early on when we were growing this, we were all hands on deck, and I would say that she was a much better manager and facilitator than I was. And so, but the point really just being that it being a family business ultimately is something that it's hard to put into words how rewarding that is in terms of the accomplishments and being able to share all of the really positive things that happen, and also to prop each other up when things perhaps don't go perfectly, is a gift, and it's something that I really don't ever take for granted. And it's not a job in that way. This business is a lifestyle business for us, and I think it shines through in a lot of ways. And so I love that about it. I also have a daughter who I've been recruiting for 10 years, but I don't know, she might not ever get in. But I love that. I love that aspect of our business.
If you can do the family business, I've seen so many family businesses go off the rails the wrong way, but the ones that can really manage it, and it's that legacy of not just compounding dollars, but really compounding relationships, compounding feelings, compounding love. Like, it is just so incredible and inspiring.
Yeah.
When those family businesses are done the right way.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of wrong ways to do it. Nepotism can be really disruptive, but to uh, to my son's great credit, his ambition is equal to his humbleness. And so, he's doing it the right way. And, that's not something you can teach somebody. They either have that sensibility or they don't. And so, so in that way, it makes me so proud to watch that. The other thing I think that's very positive is I don't really, myself and my son, we don't deal with each other on a day-to-day basis. He's in a different part of the business. But my wife and I, we have also really figured out a way to collaborate. It's such a personal endeavor that, and we're both strong personalities. I think that it took a while to figure out how to do it and build trust and to kind of almost have like a division of labor, but we've kind of figured that out now. And it's like, it's surprisingly, positive part of our life. And obviously success is helpful to that, because, you can pound your head against the wall for only so long. So yeah, no, I don't necessarily have a formula for success. I think, you either, the personalities are either there or they're not. I'm not a micromanager. And so I don't really, I think early on, I was a little bit more into, I just when you're trying to figure something out, you try and get under the covers, under the hood with everything. But I think now, not so much. And
I also think those with the most clear, uncompromising vision. I'm sorry, I keep going back to there because I'm picking it up. If you are that clear with your vision, it's very easy to create all the metrics and KPIs and all the things that need to happen to support you to get there. So where micromanagement is not essential. You're clear on where you need to go. You're clear on how to get there. And then you surround yourself with the people to help you get there.
Yeah. It's a cliche, but it's true. Meaning, surrounding yourself with the right people. You hear that a lot, obviously. And I was so used to doing it I was used to doing all the heavy lifting for so many years that I just thought that was my destiny, was to just kind of, just always have a point of view about how to do stuff. And what I've really, the big difference for us as a company was really bringing in like-minded team members that were much better executives than myself. And those people really are the heart and soul of our company. They're the ones that really make things go on. But I haven't really given up yet on creating this tone, this very particular tone and aesthetic and vision and sensibility and vision, and this sort of pathway forward about what's next and why is that interesting and exciting. That still rests pretty heavily on me, which I thoroughly enjoy. But yeah, I think you have to provide a beacon. And then if you do that, I think people rise to the occasion.
Yeah. Well, I find it incredibly inspiring with you and your wife and your family involved in this. And just for me, I'm so excited to get to know you, because my goal in life is to be an innkeeper at some point. I believe I shared that with you. And I think through all of these conversations about how I'm learning about the best of hospitality and delivering, it's only going to serve me on that journey. And in a way, this conversation is shortening my journey to get there, because I'm just new to know you, but I've known of what you're doing, and it's so you get to turn me into a fanboy now too. So
well, my
really
best advice for you is to just do it.
Yeah.
I a lot of it is you just got to fake it till you make it. And it's true. You just got to do it. If you understand business and you understand, some of the basics, and you do it in a small bite-sized sort of piece of risk, just do it.
Are you still playing basketball?
I'm not playing basketball. No, but okay. But no, I would, I'm not playing basketball. Let's put it that
Okay.
way.
If you, let's pretend you go back to, you're in the Lower East Side, you're a senior in high school, you're going to find Mr. Aganello.
Yeah.
And then you, as you right now, can appear next to yourself there.
Mhm,
And you
mhm,
pull yourself aside, you're on Ludlow Street. It's
mhm,
1980 something,
mhm.
and you give yourself some advice. What advice do you give yourself?
You know, I'm trying to answer this. You know, I always sort of had an underlying, despite what was going on, even when you're 16, 17, 18, and, you know, all the way, you know, I think people have this, some parts of it, which is that, you know, even though I really was not aware of what was in front of me, I always sort of had an underlying confidence and belief in my ability to have success in my life. And there's been, you know, and that doesn't mean necessarily financial success, but, you know, just to kind of create a lifestyle for myself that I thought was successful. And I would have just told myself to just keep believing in myself, and just, you know, you may not know everything and you don't know what the future holds. And sometimes you go left and sometimes you go right. And you sort of make these sort of conscious and subconscious decisions along the way. But I think just having a underlying belief that you're going to end up in the right spot more times than not. You don't always end up in the right spot. I've obviously, like everybody else, I've had some tough times, but you just got to keep going. And I think that that's the one thing that I remember about being that age, was that even though I felt misunderstood sometimes, because even though I just sort of always sensed that I could get this done. And I would have just encouraged that. If I could go back and do that, I would just say, you know, keep believing and keep going, and just get up every day and do the best you can. I think that's really all that you can do. And buy Apple stock.
Yeah, totally. AAPL. Back up the truck on it.
Right.
But I totally agree with you. All we can do, all anyone can do, is the best that they can every single day.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you for sharing that. How can people find you and connect with you and learn more about what you're doing?
Well, obviously on our website, Palisociety.com. I'm also on Instagram at Avi Brosh.
Great.
And that's it. And so, you know, I'm also happy to field any questions that people have. They can always email me through the website.
Perfect. I just want to say thank you so much for your time. It's been so great to get to know you, and that, like, in a way, I feel like I'm following your lead all the way from Saddle River Day School.
You know, it's been my pleasure. And, you know, I will say, you know, in this business, have a lot of, you know, you meet a lot of people, but, you know, your genuine inquisitiveness and interest and thoughtfulness is, you know, been a nice, it's been really nice to be a part of. And I hope that we can continue this friendship after this, after you used me up on the podcast.
Oh, we definitely will, because I'm definitely going to be in touch with you.
Please.
I also want to thank our listeners. If this has just changed or enlightened you in some way about how to give or receive hospitality, please share it. We're growing. We love it. And thank you, everyone. We'll see you next time.